Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. Madhav Das Gopal Krishna. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's US visit is off to a record-breaking start with a Yoga Day event at the United Nations headquarters in New York, creating a Guinness World Record for participation by most nationalities in a single yoga session. As the PM lands in Washington, D.C. in a few moments for the business end of his maiden state visit to the US, his agenda is set. And spelling it out to the American publication, Prime Minister said that India deserves a much higher, deeper and wider profile and role, emphasizing on what he called unprecedented trust between the leaders of India and US. But apart from the bilateral deliverables on defense, trade and technology, what also is galvanizing the world's largest and oldest democracies together is their common apprehensions with respect to a belligerent Beijing. And just ahead of the crucial huddles, all three nations set the tone for the closed-door discussions. While the Indian PM made it clear that respect for sovereignty of others doesn't mean compromising on India's interests, US President Joe Biden ended up equating Chinese dispensation with dictators. A seething China has now called it an open political provocation, leaving a curious world watching out for the outcome of the summit.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Let's take this across to our panel of experts. Joining us at the moment, we have with us Mr. Brahma Chellaney, Strategic Affairs Expert. Sushant Saran is with us. He is Senior Fellow at the ORF Foundation. We have Robert Lawrence Coon, China commentator and columnist. Andrew KP Leong is International and Independent China strategist. We have with us Sean Still, Georgia State Senator, as well as Dr. Stephen Klasko, advisor, General Catalyst and former President and CEO, Thomas Jefferson University. Scott Perry is US Congressman, also joining us on the broadcast. Gentlemen, I'm going to request you all to stay with me for just a minute because our correspondent Malvika Jain is at the Prime Minister's hotel at Washington, D.C., where he's expected to touch down any minute. Malvika, we understand that members of the Indian diaspora are present at that hotel. If you could speak to some of them and get a sense from them as to what their expectations are from this first state visit of Prime Minister Modi.
Well, I'm standing right outside the Willard Hotel. A lot of security arrangement has been made. We're seeing a lot of performers who have gathered around the streets to welcome Prime Minister Modi, who's expected to arrive at the Willard Hotel in the next half an hour or so. We actually have some members of the community with us who are going to be joining us.
Oh,
they have come all the way.
I've come all the way, only from Maryland.
From Maryland, okay. She's come from Maryland, but in the past few hours, I've met people who've come from California, who've come from Chicago, only to welcome Prime Minister Modi. And some of them are right there opposite the security vehicles. I'm not sure if you can actually see them. But what brings you here?
Oh my God, my husband and I have been Modi fans from 2014. We went to Madison Square Garden. We were here before. And we made every effort to come here again today.
Wonderful. Is your husband here with you?
Yeah, no, he's a hardcore
Modi fan. So what makes you a Modi fan? I mean, you don't live in the US, you don't live in India. No. So why are you so excited about Modi's arrival here?
I tell you honestly, I'm graduate from Delhi University, and I have seen practically all the languages personally. But I never thought in my lifetime India will never have a very honest and straight forward Prime Minister. That's what the reason I'm saying.
This actually to be echoed by most people who are talking to. Prime Minister Modi is expected in the next 20 minutes or so. And there is a lot of excitement here on the streets right outside Willard Hotel in Washington.
Well, absolutely. The high energy palpable there amongst the members of the Indian diaspora. Malvika, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And in fact, I'm going to ask you to stay on because we're going to come right back to you when the Prime Minister does arrive. But let me take this across to our guests who are joining us to break this down about what the next 48 hours really means. And let me begin with Mr. Rama Chilani, a strategic affairs expert. Brahma Chellaney, notwithstanding the rockstar welcome that the Prime Minister tends to get when he visits the US and other other parts of the world from members of the Indian diaspora. What we are really looking at when the Prime Minister touches down in Washington, D.C. is the business end. There are two very important dinners, as we know, tonight, as per U.S. time, and even tomorrow night. We understand there are a series of meetings. Break this down in terms of what you believe will be the most important takeaways. It's not just about defense deals, it's about trade, it's about commerce, it's about deepening, ties even in the arena of business between companies in both India and U.S. and multiple other aspects. Rama Chilani.
The deliverables from this visit would have been worked out much before the visit. Even the joint statement coming out from this visit would have been worked out in advance. And the dinner tonight, the cozy private dinner with the Bidens, and the state dinner tomorrow are going to be important occasions. The private dinner would be an occasion to exchange views privately. That will be a most significant event in terms of heart-to-heart discussions. Tomorrow's state dinner event would be a big show. But I think what stands out from this visit is the extent to which the Biden administration is going to bill it as a pivotal visit. Really, before has the U.S. government given so much hype to a foreign leader's visit as the present administration is giving to Modi's visit. At the same time, what stands out is the continuing negative commentary on India by academics and journalists. One example is the negative report in today's New York Times on Biden hosting Modi by putting democracy issues on the back burner. Now, that's not a surprise because the New York Times has been consistently critical of India for a long time, much before Modi became prime minister, though of late it's become openly negative towards India. But still, what stands out is the administration going almost overboard to build this visit as a path-breaking visit. And then you have these academics and journalists seeking to warn that the U.S. government is making a mistake by seeking to co-opt India as a close partner.
Right. Right. Let me get a sense from some of our other panelists on that. I believe Sean Still is now joining us. He's a Georgia state senator who represents the Republican Party. Sean Still, the question that many are posing over here is that, there is a section within the United States that's very skeptical about the relationship, particularly the current dispensation here in India. Whereas what we are really seeing is that for the past 3 decades at least, close to 3 decades, the two countries have actually been coming closer and closer. Each visit of either the Prime Minister here to the United States or US presidents in the past to New Delhi and other parts of India have clearly played a very key role in bringing the two democracies together. Why is it that we see this a few skeptics repeatedly raise their red flags, particularly at times of such visits? Sean Still. Mr. Sean Still, if you can hear me, sir, that question is for you. I think we have a problem with the audio there. We'll try and reconnect with him, but let me take that question across to some of our other panelists with us, because the other question that many, in fact, are asking at this point of time, and in fact, is the commentary that's coming in from China. I just want to quickly bring in Robert Lawrence Coon, China commentator and columnist. Mr. Coon, at a time when US and India are coming together, is this something that is really rattling China? We had seen, for instance, every time there is a Quad summit or every time we have, visits of Indian prime ministers to the US, there's always something about those visits that seems to be unnerving China. And this time, it's a reference to the Chinese President Xi Jinping as a dictator that seems to have got China's goat. Is this a little too much of truth for China to take or swallow?
To me, there's been some audio distortion, so it's a little hard for me to hear. But there's no doubt that this is a pivotal moment for India to emerge on the world scene. It's really remarkable to see India's development. Several things happening at the same time. Obviously, U.S.-China severe tensions, South China Sea, Taiwan issues. the war in Russia's war in Ukraine. All of these things have come together, perhaps coincidentally, with India becoming the largest population in the world, with a young demographic as opposed to China's elderly demographic. So this is a very significant moment of a recognition of India's emergence. India has been emerging, but I think this visit exemplifies a new strategic alignment in the world, with India in a very critical place, which it has never been before, certainly for hundreds, if not a few thousand years. And so from China's point of view, it is not good news. China likes to deal with countries on a bilateral basis, whether it's in the South China Sea or in any type of negotiation. It does not like to see multilateral organizations that it perceives as surrounding it. And certainly the Quad with Japan, Australia, and India certainly looks geographically to be on three sides of China, with the U.S. backing all three. So China is not very pleased about this. China is, of course, the world's second largest economy. It believes it has created enormous value for the world. 70% of the or more of the elimination of poverty over the last 10 years has been because of China.
Right.
So they've accomplished for their people. But the legitimacy of the party is based upon not just economic development, but nationalism and a pride. Right. And that reflects the borders. It reflects the borders with India as well as other places. Right. And this coming together is of concern to China.
Well, many would say, at least from the Indian perspective, Mr. Robert Lawrence Coon, that it is not China that is being encircled, but China, in fact, that is its expansionism, which in fact many are concerned about, and that's probably bringing everyone together. Let me bring in Sushant Saran on that. Sushant Saran, perhaps we've seen this back and forth play out before. We've seen similar instances in the past, but this time round, when these two countries are beginning to, or not beginning, but at least certainly consolidating on their relationship, in such an event, these kind of comments from China are not entirely unexpected, particularly because China perhaps does provide at least one of the important sources of the glue that brings countries such as US and India together.
Yeah, and that's reflected in, it's almost hysterical the way the Chinese are reacting. Frankly, as an Indian, it pleases me no end to see, the Chinese twist and turn. No less a person than Wang Yi writing an article and then, talking about Indian elites who are, who have a sense of disquiet about this closeness of the relationship between India and the United States. Frankly, the elites he's talking about are irrelevant in India today. They're not even the elites anymore. I assume he's talking about the leftists and the communists in India who don't matter anyways. But the fact, look, just the tone of his article and some of the other stuff which is coming out of China does warm the cockles of my heart. But it also shows that the Chinese are pretty rattled. There is a great sense of disquiet in the Chinese strategic thinkers about what this growing closeness between India and the United States means. Now, does this mean that India and the US are getting into some kind of a marriage? I don't think so. But even then, I think there is a partnership which has developed, which is pretty significant going forward. And I think despite all those naysayers which Brahma is talking about, and there are plenty of them, the question is, what have they been able to stop over the last 20 years of their skepticism and their cynicism and their criticism about India and, about India as a partner of the United States? What have they been able to stop in the last 20, 25 years? In fact, we are seeing both the countries getting closer and closer and closer. Who knows, maybe 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, we might even have an alliance arrangement. Who can predict the future? I don't think 20 years back anybody could have said we would come to this pass which we have come to today. So clearly the the things between the two countries are moving in the right direction. I think there is a whole lot of convergence. China is only one part of it. I think it's a very important part of the convergence between the United States and India. But it's not the only point of convergence. I think there are a whole lot of other things which are going into play out here. And I won't belabor on this whole business of shared values and stuff like that, because I think that's been done to death. We do share many values, but we also have to remember that we are not the same people. We are two separate people. We come from two separate civilizational backgrounds. And yet there is a convergence in how we perceive the world, how we look at the world. And I think that is important. Does this mean that we are going to become clones of the Americans, or Americans are going to become clones of India?
Right.
No, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But even then, I think this is a relationship everyone is watching out for. And I agree with the Americans who say that this is likely to be the most pivotal relationship of this century.
Right. And in fact, let me take another aspect, in fact, of this, and let me address this with Andrew KP Leong, who's an international independent China strategist. You know, China is just one of the many factors, as we've been discussing, Andrew KP Leong. That's pretty much the view here within India. But then, you know, there are also concerns. There are concerns when, you know, people who are established as terrorists, China continues to block them time and again at the United Nations. That does create some amount of hurt here in India, because these are people who have taken lives. And if we cannot have unanimity over a global issue such as terrorism, then China at some level playing spoilsport is something that is bound to anger people here in India, notwithstanding issues pertaining to the border aggressions.
So the question is for me, right?
Yes, Andrew KP Leong, question for you.
Thank you. Well, I think what we're seeing before our eyes is a dramatic change in the world order, whereby China is now being deeply regarded by both parties across the aisle in the United States. It's the biggest challenge to Americans' position in the world, to the so-called American-led liberal order. And then in the Asia Pacific, China sees itself being surrounded, even before recent years, by the so-called first island chain centered in Okinawa, the second island chain centered in Guam, and now more recently, the AUKUS alliance with nuclear submarines in Australia. And even during the past couple of months, putting together forming close alliance between South Korea and Japan. So if you look at the map, it's have China totally surrounded. And in spite of the fact that the Blinken's visit to Beijing, which if you read between the lines, the reception has been very frosty. Now, there's no doubt that dynamics in the world will push countries closer together, even though they are not cast iron alliance, in the same way that China and Russia being pushed together by American, making both countries their arch enemies. In the same way that United States and India are now pushed closer together by the common perceived threat from China. And now the meeting, I think, between Prime Minister Modi and Biden, of course, the biggest elephant in the room, of course, is China.
Okay.
Now, how is this going to translate into concrete things? I think the most likely outcome would be some sort of closer alliance on the military side, right, particularly on the armament production side, because I think that there is some report saying that if India could be made to be more able to produce arms and supply to allied so-called democracies in the region, this would help strengthen Americans' containment of China.
Okay.
Of course, that is a cause of concern because, and then at the other side, on the other side of the coin, it's not as if India would necessarily like to be.
Well, sir, China provides arms to Pakistan, and that certainly is a cause of concern to India. So I don't think that should be a huge concern if India is capable of manufacturing its own arms. I'm going to let Brahma Chellaney come in on those 2 points. One is India's domestic defense manufacturing capabilities, which was referred to just now by KP Leong. And he's actually comparing the US-India coming together with China and Russia coming together. Is there a comparison there to be drawn? Brahma Chellaney.
Well, I think the fact that US policy has compelled Moscow to pivot to China, creating a closer partnership between Moscow and Beijing, is something that the US doesn't like. After all, a China-Russia axis has been America's strategic nightmare for long. But unfortunately, it's US policy that is creating this kind of emerging alliance between Moscow and Beijing. So given this trend, given this growing partnership between Russia and China, India, the third giant, its salience is growing in American policy. That's one factor among several factors. I think the biggest factor influencing American policy toward India is the fact that India today is the world's fastest growing major economy.
Right.
Its demographic profile, as the world's one of the world's youngest countries, the fact that that India is a huge market, also a huge market for American weapons. All those considerations are playing a role. But certainly the China-Russia alliance, or the emerging alliance, is one factor.
Okay. Okay, let me take this question across to Sean Still. Sean Still, when I came to you a little earlier, we were talking about how there is a bunch of naysayers. Of course, perhaps they are there in both countries, but their voices tend to become more shrill, or at least in any case more prominent during the course of such visits and when they take place, because there is, and it is of course an issue that many have raised here in India as well, as to whether there is any basis of the criticism when they question India and they question Prime Minister Modi and several questions related to democracy. By the end of the day, what we are celebrating is that the world's largest and the world's oldest democracy is something that we have traditionally celebrated coming together when we talk in the context of India and United States. Sean Still, how do you see this?
Thanks for having me. So in my home state of Georgia, we have approximately 250,000 people of Indian descent. And we are so excited at the Prime Minister's visit. The message that I'm hearing the most here in Georgia is really focused on the trade imbalance that the U.S. has with China compared to India. The U.S. is India's largest trade partner at approximately $123 billion a year, compared to China, who's under $100 billion with India. And so we look at that, but then we also look at the aspect of China is producing almost a 20-to-1 ratio of goods and services to the United States compared to India. What we would really like to see here in Georgia is for India to lean more into a relationship with the United States, to not accept the BRICS economy model, where they're aligned with the Chinese currency as opposed to the dollar. And I think that if we can keep India out of focusing on BRICS and moving away from the dollar, but instead lean into it so that we can be the trade partners that I think that we all want it to be, that will provide a much more stable platform for everyone.
All right. Sean Still, I would request you to stay on with us because my colleague Malvika is back with me. I believe she has a large number of Indian diaspora members, including several performers who are gathered around her. Malvika, over to you. All right, Malvika, I think there's a problem with your audio there. Request you to unmute yourself and continue speaking. I can see the excitement. I can see the dancing happening behind you. You have a large number of those dancers with you as well. But there's some problem with that audio. We'll try and rectify it. Let's listen into these pictures coming in. All right, let's take a quick look at this ground report that Malvika sent us from the Willard Hotel, where Prime Minister Modi is expected anytime now. A quick look at her interaction with members of the Indian diaspora.
Well, I'm standing right outside the Freedom Plaza, and I have with me a group of performers from Tamil Nadu who are now living in the United States. Welcome to all of you. So, since when have you been practicing for Prime Minister Modi's visit?
It's been like a month since we started. We did have performed this before in another event. So, we are representing the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu. We are doing different folk dances such as Oilatam, Parai, Silambatam, Kuliyatam, Kavadiyatam, and Karahatam.
Awesome. And then, what motivated you to perform today?
What motivated you to perform? Just to introduce all the different cultures from India.
Yeah, we are really proud to represent our culture. No matter where we go, we would like to carry our culture, our tradition, our roots with us. So, we also make sure that the kids also are aware of it, and, it doesn't stay just with us. So we're really happy to be here and represent our forms and our culture.
Sure. Can you do a short performance for us that you would be doing today?
Yeah, we can do that. Sure. Yeah. Go ahead. This is the Kavadi Kavadiya.
Less slippery than the stage. We don't want to risk our kids. We are trying to be fair and solid. But if the team feels they are able to perform on the stage, they are welcome to perform on the stage.
Yes. So kindly, we are taking every precaution, and your emotions in mind while we are doing this. We thank you so much for cooperating with us.
All right. In fact, let's quickly go across to our other panelists who are with us. Sushant Saran is also with us. Sushant, very important point that was made by Sean Still, and he refers to trade, he refers to the business aspects as well. Commerce is also a very important aspect, and also a sense that I was getting when I was speaking to an official in the Ministry of External Affairs earlier this week is that one of the big focuses this time around is to reduce, perceptions that exist within businesses between both countries, which have perhaps been not as forthcoming as they could have, to try and ensure that there is more engagement, and that is expected to be one of the big takeaways in this entire visit. So closer economic ties, economic cooperation at the level of companies, at the level of businesses is also something that's being looked at, and that's also an expectation, isn't it?
Yeah, but Madhav, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? You can't have a relationship which is based only on security and strategic affairs. There has to be something more to that relationship. So security and strategy is one side of it. There is this whole issue of the worldview of both the countries, which converges, which is the other side of it. And then a third and a very important pillar in a relationship, any relationship for that matter, is the economic aspect of it. Now, between the US and India, number one, I think the trade, the gentleman from Georgia was talking about trade between the two countries. I think the trade between India and the United States simply cannot be compared with the kind of predatory trading practices that the Chinese follow. They've closed their markets in ways that are unimaginable in this day and age. But if you look at the trade patterns between India and the United States, yes, we do enjoy a slight, the balance is slightly in our favor, but only slightly. Otherwise, it's a fairly balanced kind of a trade which we have with the United States, number one. Number two, I couldn't agree more with him when he talks about this whole business of, replacing the dollar with, God forbid, the yuan. Now, I think if India was to ever sign on to something like that, we would be shooting ourselves not just in the foot, we would be shooting ourselves in the head. We have to ensure that the yuan never rises to the level at which the dollar or even some of the other convertible currencies have risen. For us, it's simply not in our interest because the last thing we want to see is China, which is not only a very aggressive and belligerent neighbor, but to give them the kind of that economic power which comes with a freely convertible currency, acceptable the world over, becoming a kind of the second reserve currency. I think that would be disastrous for India, and nothing India should do which allows that situation to come. And finally, Madhav, I think it's very important, and we really need to look inside. I think Prime Minister Modi has been pushing for a lot of investment from the United States into India. A lot of it has come, but a lot more can come. There are certain problems in, and part of those problems are because of democracy. And I'm not saying democracy is a bad thing, but a raucous democracy creates its own problems. We can't do what the Chinese do, that they wipe away entire populations. You demolish entire cities to facilitate investments. We can't do something like that, and I'm sure the Americans also will understand it.
Very interesting.
There is something slow in how we do things, but I think there are some policies which we need to get right so that India becomes a very attractive destination for American investments, even a kind of a production hub for servicing some of the markets around, and maybe even the United States. Why not? So some of it has started happening, but a lot more needs to be done on that count.
Well, it may be slow, but it certainly is steady, and that's certainly the message coming out over there. Slow and steady does win the race, Robert Lawrence Coon, and notwithstanding what was said earlier by Mr. Leong a few moments ago when he expressed apprehensions about India's defense manufacturing capabilities, it is this possibility of India being this huge counterweight to China that not just the United States but several countries are looking at in terms of a very distinct possibility. Perhaps after COVID, we've seen those concerns being a little more exacerbated, those concerns being once again implemented in terms of how India and Indian companies manufacture, and that certainly is something that even the earlier speaker, Mr. Sean, still was expressing. The bigger concern for India, for the United States also, would be to reduce this kind of dependence on China as a manufacturing hub.
Sorry, is it the question for me?
Robert Lawrence Coon, question for you, sir.
Yes, thank you. There's no doubt that American companies are thinking about de-risking, which is the word du jour that people are using, not decoupling from China, which would be largely impossible and hurt the American public, but de-risking. And India figures very highly in that strategy. So the economic opportunities for India, which frankly should be occurring anyway, even if China were not considered a mutual threat, because there are very natural relationships between India and the United States that are structural. When you add the security element and the concern about China, that adds a certain impetus and maybe drives the defense areas and arms productions, et cetera. But on the economic side, it's just a progress and a recognition of where India sits today in the world scene. And over time, that should migrate as well. Countries in Africa should begin when they can to do manufacturing. So it's a very specific process that goes from country to country. It started in Japan and South Korea, and then China. It's a natural process, and this is India's time. So I think we need to, as several of the guests have said, analyze the relationship both on the economic front as well as the strategic and military alliance front. But there's no doubt from the American point of view that this is India's time.
Well, absolutely. In fact, let me get Mr. Leong on that. Mr. Leong, how soon do you see India replacing China as a manufacturing hub and perhaps even as an important source of the military equipments that you were talking about? That's certainly the expectation of many of the panelists on the show tonight.
I think, first of all, the relationship between India and the United States is not exactly the same as the relationship, for example, between the United States and Canada or Australia or the Five Eyes members, because India is still maintains a relatively non-aligned position. This is exemplified by India's position on the Ukraine, on Russia, on the Ukraine war, and is buying Russian oil using ruby instead of the US dollar. And that comes to the question about de-dollarization. I'm afraid that this is a worldwide momentum. It's not just China. You can see that not only the BRICS, but also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also certain countries in Latin America, including Brazil and other countries, because the US dollar, unfortunately, has been weaponized by the United States, and that threatens a number of countries in the developing world because they could be next. I think this is only a natural phenomenon. I'm afraid that this is an undercurrent there. I don't think that India is going to be able to reverse that. And indeed, India is not doing anything to reverse that. And as I said, I mean, the India is using the ruby to buy Russian oil. But I think that this is a process happening. And of course, there is no question at all that the renminbi will be able to displace the US dollar because the renminbi is only about 3% of the world's financial markets. So the renminbi is not going to replace the US dollar, but on the other hand, the renminbi is increasing in importance as a trading currency because China is the largest trading partner to 128 countries around the world, compared with only 58 of the United States. It's deeply embedded in the world's supply and value chain. And that's why even the United States has got to reject this strategy from so-called decoupling, which is not possible because China is embedded in everything, even though the products are not made in China, and to de-risking. So I think that the centrality of China in the global supply and value chain is going to remain for a long, long time. Because after all, China is the world's largest manufacturer and trader, and it's the second largest economy. And in a not too distant future, it could well be the largest economy. I don't have time to talk about the so-called peak China kind of theory. I can go on for half an hour on that. But I think that the world would be too naive just to believe that the rise of China could be derailed.
Okay. Let me take that question across to Sean Still because he's the one who first raised those concerns. Sean Still, would you like to respond to what was just stated by Andrew KP Leong? Because he says that China's role as a trading partner to over 120 countries or so, it's something that no one else is going to be able to beat for a very long time, merely because as a trading currency, China's way ahead of anyone else. That's the claim that he's making. So, and clearly, of course, these were the concerns that you had expressed earlier as well. How do you respond to Andrew KP Leong?
The way I respond is this. India's greatest export are its people. And we have to look at how India can export something besides textiles and technology. Manufacturing is where China has really captured the market, especially in electronics. And as amazing as the people are that India does export, if they could put that effort into keeping that GDP at home and growing their own revenue and growing their own profits, it will make them the world powerhouse that they deserve and should be. China has become the trade partner to everyone because they manufacture everything and then they ship it out to the world. They don't necessarily export their people in the same way. And I believe that this is the time for India to start looking at areas, market segments that they can move into. If auto parts and technology and textiles are the big three, then what would be number 4? What would be number 5? And to be able to have that big term, that long-term discussion on what that will be. I've been talking to my counterparts here in Georgia to plan a trade trip later this year so that we could look at, what are the things that we're importing into Georgia that could be replaced if China was able to manufacture those same items. It's something that, because of your democracy, because of our democracy, it makes sense to not be reliant on communist China to be able to be providing these goods and services otherwise. So we can't just sit back and say we feel trapped, and because they're so big, they're the big monster in the room. Yeah, they are big. Yeah, they are the biggest manufacturer, but why? Why do they have to remain that? Why can't we substitute some of that with Indian hard work and entrepreneurship?
All right, gentlemen, please stay with us. I also have with us, we have with us Scott Perry, who's a congressman joining us on the broadcast. Scott Perry, thank you so much for joining us and speaking to Times Now. Now, you've expressed your excitement over the Prime Minister's upcoming address to the Congress. Now, this is going to be the second time that he's going to be addressing the Congress. Tell us about what the lawmakers in the United States are expecting the PM to speak about.
Well, first set the stage. This is the second time that that the Prime Minister will address the joint session of Congress. So that's generally unprecedented or unheard of in modern times. And I think it underscores what I characterize as the most consequential and impactful partnership, relationship between two nations in the 21st century. The world is a dangerous place, and the fact that the world's largest democracy is being represented in what people describe appropriately as the world's greatest democracy is something that is, I think it puts our adversaries, our common adversaries, on notice that we are working together, that we are going to stand together, and the things that are important to us are important to the rest of the world. And so that's why I'm excited, because, look, with a bellicose China, with an out-of-control Russia, North Korea, and Iran, the world, not just America, but the world, not just India, the whole world needs to know that someone is speaking on their behalf about the things that are important to them, and are willing to stand for them and stand against the things that are bad in the world, the tyranny, the oppression. And so there is a cause for excitement. There is a cause for optimism.
Well, and the Indo-US partnership is seeing a steely resolve on both sides to elevate the bilateral relationship to a global strategic partnership. The two governments are pursuing more than 50 bilateral dialogue mechanisms at various levels. What can both our countries do to take these ties to the next level?
Well, look, both countries are evolving in our relationships with each other and with other nations. For instance, India previously oftentimes seen militarily as what we characterize as a Warsaw Pact nation. And, the United States of America wishes to be in a close military partnership with India. We think it's a strategic alliance that provides many, many benefits for both countries. And in that, we would prefer that India buy our armament, United States armament, work collaboratively with the United States to develop armament that suits India's needs, but also sends a very clear message to adversaries like Russia, like the Communist Party of China, like Iran, closer in many cases to India's borders than the United States, that their tyranny, their brand of oppression that they impose upon their people will not be considered in India, because India is partnered with freedom that is exemplified by their partnership with the United States of America. And so it goes to military, it goes to diplomacy and diplomatic relations, it goes to things like energy production and energy consumption, where you buy it, who you buy it from, how you use it. Quite honestly, the list is limitless. And so we wish to cultivate this relationship to its deepest level for the benefit of both the people of India and of the United States, but quite honestly, to the free world.
All right, Scott Perry, thank you so much for speaking to us. I'd also like to thank our other panelists, Sean Still, Andrew KP Leong, Robert Lawrence Coon, and Sushant Saran, as well as Brahma Chellaney, for joining us. It's been a very illuminating discussion, certainly, and expectations are high on both sides from what will transpire over the next 48 hours. Thanks so much for joining us this evening on the Newshour Agenda. We'd also like to inform our viewers that we'll be covering live all of those developments right through the night tomorrow, so you can catch all the updates right here on Times Now tomorrow night as well.